Now, what I want to ask you is when we're looking at the campuses, though, can you make a blanket statement here? I'm going to put you on the spot. Can you make a statement that there are people of certain ideologies who are more likely to cause a campus ruckus than others? Yes, I am looking to score points here. I'll be honest with you.
Oh yeah, no, it's very, very clear that it's a relatively small group. It's on the left. It's what's commonly called social justice activists or social justice warriors, and we can get into why that is. I mean, the history is full of extremist right-wing movements, extremist left-wing movements, but the fact that universities have switched from leaning left throughout the 20th century to being almost entirely on the left between the late 1990s and about 2010, we had as the greatest generation retired, a lot of them were Republicans. They were replaced by baby boomers. So the makeup of the faculty, especially in the humanities and social sciences, went from about 3-to-1, let's say, left-right ratio to about 10-to-1 or 15-to-1 in most departments. So in this particular case, it is a group that is on the left. But I'm not saying that I'm not saying the left is more closed-minded than the right in general, just in this case because of the universities concentrating. And the key thing to keep in mind, don't call them liberal. That's the key thing everybody needs to focus on. What we're seeing is an explosion of illiberalism. Progressives can be liberal or illiberal. Conservatives can be liberal or illiberal. Liberal means freedom, liberty. You believe in free expression, free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of association. And what we're suffering from is an explosion of illiberalism from certain groups of students, really primarily students more than faculty on the left.
I had a political scientist on the show toward the end of last year, April Kelly Wessner of Elizabethtown College, and
she's a member of Heterodox Academy. Yes.
Oh, of course. So you know each other. Okay.
Yes.
Well, because she had an interesting conclusion, because we're inclined to think that the so-called millennials are the most tolerant people who ever walked the earth. But she says, well, if you define tolerant in the way that most of us would define tolerant, not just that you accept a lot of different lifestyles, but that how you treat people you disagree with and how you conceive of people you disagree with, they may be the least tolerant people we've seen in a long time. Where do you come down on that?
Yeah, no, I think April has done some great writing on our site, on Heterodox Academy. I think she is correct. So here's what I would add as a social psychologist. So as we talked about last time, in my book, The Righteous Mind, I analyze morality, and one of the principles is morality binds and blinds. So look at any movement, what do they hold sacred? Always start by asking, what do they hold sacred? And around that, you'll find a ring of motivated ignorance. So millennials today have been raised with the central virtues are inclusion. Diversity and inclusion are very important virtues. So this is all great. I don't want to pick on millennials. The problems that we're talking about are problems caused by the things that my generation and the baby boomers did to them. So this is not a blame game. It's just saying that they were raised with this incredible mandate for tolerance and inclusion of people of different races, different sexual orientations. So that's all great. I'm all in favor of a more inclusive world, more inclusive campuses that don't make people feel unwelcome. So that's all great. I totally agree with the goal. But what happens is, as Aristotle told us, any virtue carried to extremes becomes a vice. And if you make inclusion of people who are different, if you make that your absolute sacred virtue, and then you have a professor, let's say, who gives a lecture on how, well, actually, gender differences are real, and maybe that contributes to the wage gap. Well, suddenly you're going to get people, what? Are you saying that women deserve to be paid less? And so you can't say such things. You can't say anything on campus that will make any member of one of the 7 protected groups feel uncomfortable. So I think April is exactly right that this extreme value placed on inclusion and diversity has led them to be extremely intolerant of anyone who says anything that's taken to be uncomfortable for a member of a protected group. There are many beliefs that are so central, so foundational, that if you tried to argue against that, well, actually, what we see on campus, we see students saying that this would invalidate their existence. So if you were to try to argue that some cause of prejudice or racism was not real, or that disparities by race or gender had other causes, Some would take this as an existential threat, an existential attack. You would be trying to invalidate their existence, which is an act of violence. So your very efforts to persuade with reasons are violence.
So because they look at it that way, they come to think of a debate, an open debate and free speech as being these terms that sound neutral and sound like they're just advocating openness, but that actually the very fact that we're debating it means that we're denying their right to exist. Am I kind of getting it?
Yes, that's correct. And when I've had conversations like this with some groups of those students, I've been told that these norms of debate and civility, these were invented by white males, white European males. So what's interesting about the way discourse has changed, I think it's actually quite dangerous for free inquiry and for universities. And April has written brilliantly on this. The way it's changed is that certain norms that grow out of the Marxist tradition have been established on campus. And so one of them is what you might call the ad hominem albus argument. I just looked this up this morning. Albus is the Latin word for white. So, we all know what an ad hominem argument is. It's not a valid form of argument. You reject, rather than arguing against what someone said, you say, yeah, well, you're Jewish, therefore, or, you're gay or whatever. So therefore, I don't have to listen to you. And so what students are taught in many of their classes is start with an analysis of privilege. So who's the speaker? What are the speaker's motives? Is the speaker just defending his privilege? And so since it's often, this is literally most of the arguments I've gotten, most of the counter arguments, literally since I started this last August with my Atlantic article with Greg Lukianoff, we've been scouring the internet. We've been looking for people arguing back. We've been looking for reasons why we might be wrong. What have we missed? And I kid you not, more than half of the arguments, and I'm talking like a total of maybe 6 blog posts, like nobody's really argued back, but most of them are basically, well, they're white males. They're just defending their privilege. And so that's what I call the ad hominem albus argument. And if students learn to start every analysis with a privilege check and to dismiss arguments made by the privileged people and to emphasize arguments made by the victim people, they have more authenticity, they have more valid life experience. Well, if this is what they're learning in college, we're basically, we're teaching them to judge everybody by their race and sex. Are you serious? This is really what we're doing? Yes, this is what we are doing on campus. And so it's no surprise then that you cannot argue them out of a position. I'm not saying they could argue us out of a position. I'm not saying we're more rational, but at least, you and I come from a tradition where if someone gives you an argument, you at least address yourself to the argument, not to the person. Now, and again, let me make clear, I want to say this over and over again. This is not an indictment of all millennials. Most students on campus are not like this. And we're only talking about elite residential colleges. So most students go to a vocational school, a community college, a non-residential school. That they are not infected with this way of thinking. This is our elite schools in which students come, they live on campus. All the professors are on the left. All of the smart and cool people are on the left. And they're immersed in this world for 4 years. These ideas come especially out of the humanities. So those who are majoring in the natural sciences are not as much touched by this. So again, this is not an indictment of most young people, but it is a small group of the illiberal left that everyone's afraid of. So this relatively small group on each campus has everyone cowed. The students are afraid of them. The professors are afraid of them. They have outsized influence. So once you look at it that way, then you say, well, what can we do so that in the future, the number of people in this group will be smaller and less influential? So here are a couple of suggestions. One, as I wrote in a Wall Street Journal editorial op-ed with Lee Jussin, we looked into the research on what leads to feelings of marginalization. And one of them was having a lot of ethnic enclaves. That is, when you have a lot of women's studies centers, African studies centers, Latino studies, when you have all those groups, those tend to heighten the sense of racial separateness and grievance. The protesters all over the country are demanding more of them, and the university administrators are giving in. That's going to make things worse. So if a university were serious about restoring free inquiry and eliminating the intimidation factor of this small group of students, they would gradually try to phase out all the different enclaves. Now, you can keep the courses. It's when you have a whole department devoted to grievance. That's when you get a real cultural problem. Second, I would change admission standards. Don't keep rewarding students for writing about how they challenged this, they were social justice activists on that, they protested this. why don't you reward people or say, tell me about a time when you dealt with someone who thought differently than you? How did you deal with that? Were you ever able to understand a different perspective? So if we admit for social justice activism, we get social justice activists. If we admit for viewpoint diversity or the ability to live with viewpoint diversity, we'll get students that are able to deal with viewpoint diversity. Boy, there are lots of other things that we can do. And my hope is that there will be a couple of schools among the top 50, a couple will realize that most of the country is disgusted by what the universities are doing to cave into this small group of activists. That a couple, I'm hoping that the University of Virginia and the University of Chicago, that have long free speech traditions, that their students will vote to declare themselves a dangerous school rather than a safe school. A dangerous school is one that does not try to protect students from words and ideas, and a safe school is one that does. So I'm hopeful that the students themselves at some schools will rise up and say, enough. We're tired of this small group intimidating everyone into silence. We want to change things.
You know, while on the one hand, we all know that not a lot of university administrators are going to wind up in the second edition of Profiles in Courage, but on the other hand, they at the same time have to know that the first administrator who steps forward and says, you know what, this is not happening on my campus, you're going to sit down and study like everybody else and stop intimidating everybody on campus, not only would that person be an instant celebrity, but applications to that school would pour in from bright students all over the country who just don't want to be intimidated. Why do we still not see one person doing that?
Oh, no, we have. So
I want to hear it then. Tell me.
Oh, the president of Ohio State. This is just fantastic. So the president of Ohio State, it was like about a month ago. Let's see. What's his name? Just looking it up online here. At any rate, if you just Google Ohio State student protesters, so when they came storming into his office and issued their ultimatum to him, he refused to meet with them. He sent out a deputy who said, he'd be very happy to meet with you if you schedule an appointment, but he's not going to accept an ultimatum. And when you stormed in here, you made everyone who works here feel unsafe. They felt
that's
threatened.
awesome.
Yeah. So he turned their logic against them. And he said, they're going to come back to work tomorrow at 8 a.m. And if you are still here, then you will be arrested. We will give you a chance to go to jail for your beliefs. And it worked like a charm. So let's see. What is his name? I need to find his name to... Jay Casey. There we are. Ohio State. Oh, the vice president. The vice president, Jay Casey, is the one who came out and read them the Riot Act. And he said, Dr. Drake will never receive a list of demands, and he will not negotiate with you. So I think what's happening here is that pretty much all the presidents last fall caved in. They had a mob on their doorstep. They felt that pressure. But then, boy, did they hear an earful from the alumni, from trustees, and I think from some students and faculty on campus who are afraid to speak up publicly, but who spoke to him privately. So now they're realizing that if you cave in, you're a laughing stock and everyone outside campus will make fun of you. And if you stand up, you'll actually get a lot of support. So that's why I think the tide is going to turn. I think next fall, things are going to look a lot different. This hit us all by surprise last fall. But I think the great majority are bothered. The great majority of people on the left are bothered by the illiberalism. And I think we're going to see a much more unified front in standing up to them next fall. So this is another thing that must happen, that every school can do beginning next fall. Have an absolute rule. Go ahead and protest. Hold up signs. Ask hostile questions. The minute you take it upon yourself to shut down the event, the minute you and your allies take it upon yourselves to decide what your fellow students get to hear and what they don't, you are expelled. This is as antithetical to the mission of a university as could be. This must become the greatest taboo, the greatest sin on campus, is to shut down those who disagree with you. That's one change I would urge on every campus in America. I actually got into this whole line of work in 2011 when I was asked to give a talk at the main conference of social psychologists, and the president of the organization invited me, and I said, well, I would speak on the future of social psychology and how we have no diversity and this is damaging our science. And he said, great, go right ahead. So Todd Heatherton, very open-minded guy, wonderful president of the organization. So I gave this talk. And I presented data on how one-sided we had been and how it affected our scholarship. And the field actually reacted pretty well. And that led to 5 other social psychologists joining with me to write up a more formal paper. That paper came out last September. And we knew that when the paper came out, there'd be some discussion of it, and then it would fade into oblivion. We didn't want that to happen. So in September, we launched a website called heterodoxacademy.org because we found that the same problem, the complete loss of political diversity, affected sociology, law, and many other fields in the social sciences and the academy. So we didn't know that this was all going to blow up. We just launched the site in September, hoping to make a sustained case that while diversity is important, the most important kind of diversity is viewpoint diversity. You have to have people who think differently. You have to make room for them to speak up. And that's what we've been losing as we've been focusing on race and gender and other kinds of demographic diversity. So we put up the site in September, and then all hell broke loose at Halloween at Yale and other places. And campuses have been in intellectual lockdown, in a sense, since then. So we've emerged as the major site at which professors who are concerned about what's going on can come. We have 28 so far. We're about to open up the membership to everybody who wants to join, who's a professor. And we are making the sustained case that the academy cannot function unless it takes seriously the need for viewpoint diversity, and it starts working to promote that. So I urge all your listeners, go to heterodoxacademy.org. We've got lots of great essays, lots of resources to understand what's happening, and to arm yourself to argue back.